Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Charu Kaushic, and I am the Scientific Director of the CIHR Institute of Infection and Immunity, and also a professor in the Department of Pathology and Molecular Medicine at McMaster University. And I want to thank CAR for inviting me to this Mid-Career Infectious Disease Researchers Workshop. I'm very pleased to be here today. And I will be speaking about the Mid-Career Conundrum of too many demands, not enough time, and no safety net. Okay, so today I'm going to be talking to you about three different things. First of all, I was asked to talk about my own personal trajectory for my career. The second part, I'm going to talk specifically about mid-career opportunities and challenges. And for the third part, I'm going to go a little bit into what CIHR is doing in terms of providing more opportunities for mid-career researchers. Some of you might know me, some of you might not. Just wanted to kind of introduce myself, who I am and what I do. I'm an HIV researcher who is a mucosal immunologist by training, and for more than 20 years, that's what I have been doing. I've been a researcher and a principal investigator, students, lab, teaching, the typical thing that academic researchers do. Currently, that's about 50% of my time that I spend doing. The other 50% is what I do as the scientific director of the CIHR Institute of Infection and Immunity, a position that I took up in 2018 that will continue to 2022 and potentially for another 4 years, so 2026 if everything goes well. And in that position, I do a number of things that include outreaching to the infection and immunity community within Canada and liaisoning with international infection and immunity community internationally at different podiums, different organizations. I represent Government of Canada in many of these areas. And that's what I spend a lot of my current time doing. And I'll start out by explaining what exactly does a CIHR Institute of Infection and Immunity Scientific Director does. So CIHR, I'm sure most of you are familiar with, is the biggest Government of Canada health research funding agency. And not only is the mandate of CIHR to create new knowledge, but very importantly, it's also translation of the research into products that improve health of Canadians. So services, health services, products, knowledge translation is a very key part of what CIHR funds and focuses on. In terms of its location within the Government of Canada, CIHR falls within the mandate of the Minister of Health. However, because CIHR has governing council, it actually answers directly to the governing council rather than being accountable directly to the Minister of Health, although we do fall within the portfolio of the Ministry of Health. A little overview of CIHR. I won't get into depths of it because this is not a CIHR talk. So CIHR has 13 virtual institutes. The Institute of Infection and Immunity is one of the institutes, arguably one of the largest ones. The total budget for CIHR to fund research and capacity building and knowledge translation efforts is about $1.2 billion, with over 250 partners involved in this. And CIHR supports over 265 institutes, which include over 7,400 grants and awards. So, as I said, the largest funding agency within Government of Canada. The Institute of Infection and Immunity, as I pointed out, is one of the 13 institutes. And as such, the vision for the Institute of Infection and Immunity is really to be a Canadian focal point for reference to harness the research in infection and immunity, and to become the international and national reference point for utilization of those research to improve healthcare. We also provide national leadership priorities and programs to promote infection and immunity research. There's cross-cutting values of excellence, integrity, ethics, collaboration, innovation, public interest, and now EDI, equity, diversity, and inclusion values are included in these. And finally, the goal is to promote and support excellence in research in infection and immunity. And in order to do that, we basically identify research priorities, establish partnerships, and undertake collaborative research initiatives. So currently, the Institute of Infection and Immunity is housed within McMaster, which is my home institute. And that's how the model works, where the institutes move every 8 years to wherever the scientific director is located. So the Institute of Infection and Immunity moved to McMaster University, and shown in these pictures are home where we are located, the building on the McMaster campus, the Michael DeGroote Center for Learning and Discovery where we are located. Here's the staff that work with me day to day on the III, as I will call it, work. And it's a small staff, but highly efficient and very functional. And we function as a very tight team to deliver all the programs. Of course, we work in collaboration with the 12 other institutes across Canada, as well as the CIHR headquarters, which is in Ottawa, that houses about 400 other employees for CIHR. So it keeps us busy. And what exactly do we keep busy with? Like I said, international coordination activities, communications with and to the scientific communities, partnership, initiative oversight, scientific leadership in Government of Canada, action plans, community engagement, and of course, developing and management of strategic funding portfolios, strategic investments in open competitions, organizing events such as new investigator forums, strengthening workshop, and providing scientific leadership to the Government of Canada's research priority. For example, CAR audience will be very familiar with the AIDS and HIV initiative, which is now STBBI, or Sexually Transmitted and Bloodborne Infection Initiative. So for all intents and purposes, what people see, I give this example of the iceberg illusion. What people see is this tip of the iceberg. By all accounts, I'm a very successful Canadian researcher. I'm a leader in my area, and nationally and internationally. I provide many leadership roles. So what people see is the success, that's the tip of the iceberg. What I'm going to talk to you today is about the inside, what you don't see, and what somebody like me has gone through in the past 20, 25 years. Just to explain to you that where you are in your careers is no different than most career trajectories. And it's not a straight path. It's a winding path to where you end up seeing people who look like they've succeeded, and for all practical matters, they have. So underlying this iceberg of success is all of these things that are outlined here: persistence, failure, sacrifice, disappointment, discipline, hard work, dedication. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that today. So I like this slide because it reminds me of what I was 30 years ago. So in 1992, in 1990 actually, I was in the middle of my graduate school, and everybody has to start somewhere. And that's where I started, at the National Institute of Immunology in New Delhi, India. And this is a good reminder because this was the first time I had received any kind of award. Well, I got a scholarship to go into this program, but my work during my PhD was given the Best Basic Prize Award for that year, 1990. And I remember being so proud of my accomplishment at that time, not recognizing how much work was there ahead of me. And then after that, I moved to the US, did my postdoc in mucosal immunology and reproductive immunology, published a dozen good papers during my postdoc years, got a Rockefeller postdoc fellowship, and then transitioned to McMaster University in a new program that they had, the viral vaccine division, where I started my own lab and started putting together a research program to understand the effects of sex hormone on sexually transmitted pathogens and to understand the immune responses to the sexually transmitted infections. I was given a position of the assistant professor in Department of Pathology and Molecular Medicine. And I got my first CIHR grant, I think 2 years, or one and a half year after starting. So, things were going well. And then fast forward 2 years into my appointment, and we published sort of one of the bigger papers that we had been working on. I was doing most of the work myself at that time as a new investigator. And this work really looked at and provided information on a mouse model that we were developing because I was working on hormones and how they affect sexually transmitted infections. And the paper basically summarized how progesterone increases susceptibility and decreases immune response to genital herpes infection. And we showed that mouse that were treated with a compound that we were using, it's a hormonal contraceptive, medroxyprogesterone acetate increased susceptibility 100 times. And I was presenting this work at OHTN, which had given me a new investigator scholarship. And I remember that during this presentation, there was press there were community members there, and somebody got up and asked me, what does this mean for women who are on contraceptives? And I remember being like a deer caught in a headlight. I had no idea how to answer that question because all my life I had been an academic person. I had worked with mice, I had worked with samples, I had worked in immunology. I had never thought about what my work meant in real life for women who were taking these kind of contraceptives. So I did manage to kind of make my way through that conference answering that question as best as I could. But that experience really brought to me the fact that my work and my research and what I do could actually make a real life difference. And I look back and I think that was kind of like a life-changing moment for me, which I didn't realize at that time. But after that experience, like I said, it was a thought that kind of became my most profound thought of everything that I did. I would run it through the lens of what does this mean for women? This increase in susceptibility, how would that translate for women? This big eureka moment of my work can make a difference in real life. And I could actually do work that could help women make informed choices about their reproductive health. Shifted the whole focus of my thinking about my research program from a very academic endocrinology, hormonal immunology, mucosal immunology to a translational research program, which was really driven by questions rather than things that I knew about or I could focus on. And over the last 15 years, that really has been the focus of my work, where we focused on women's reproductive health. We've talked or focused a lot on what makes women more susceptible to sexually transmitted infections, with a particular focus on HIV and herpes as model systems. And over the years, we've published many, many papers that have been featured in various media. There's been interviews, first reports, some of which I put here as exemplars. And more importantly than the media reports, which of course is very important because that's translational research, communicating your research to the public is a really important part. Otherwise, your research is captured in papers and sitting in libraries, virtual libraries now. More importantly, this focus on women's reproductive health really allowed me to connect with community. And my work, because of the area that I was working in, focused primarily on the African, Caribbean, Black community. And I worked both internationally, in Kenya, and other places, primarily through my connections with collaborators such as Keith Folk, who you probably heard yesterday, and through the University of Manitoba group who work with the Kenyan sex worker cohorts, but also here in Toronto at Women's Health and Women's Hand, at the African Caribbean Community Clinic, where we're still conducting work there as part of my research that I do, and we're actually conducting a clinical trial there. And that has been probably the most educational experience in my life to understand what research can mean in real life to women who actually need to understand better to alter their risks for sexually transmitted infections like HIV. In addition to that, of course, the research program in 2018, when I switched to this current position, I was holding 4 CIHR grants at that time, all within the theme of understanding susceptibility and immune responses to sexually transmitted infection in women. We had a long-standing research grant that focused on the sex hormone mechanism and how that alters susceptibility and immune responses. A few years later, I had been able to get a grant on understanding HIV pathogenesis. And then a large team grant where we started doing work on microbiome and understanding the connections between hormones, microbiome, and innate immunity. And then finally, a clinical trials grant that I just got as I was switching to this position, where we were trying to translate our work into a clinical trial to see if we could use all the knowledge that we had gathered to improve the vaginal health of African Caribbean women. And of course, along that journey of 15 years came many papers, some of who are listed here from the last few years, very immunological papers, susceptibility papers, cell biology papers, humanized mouse papers. So a variety of papers that were published in that time. In the 20 years that I was doing this work, 34 trainees, graduate students, postdoctoral fellows, clinical trainees, 32 undergraduate thesis students, many courses that I developed, taught in different streams of the Faculty of Health Sciences, developed graduate courses in immunology, mucosal immunology, viral pathogenesis, workshops, organizing conferences, trainee days, alternative careers in medical sciences seminar series, and other statistics like how many grants. This is just to give you an idea of that tip of that iceberg, that this is what you see on top, but it took 20 years and a lot of time, hours, day-to-day work that is involved in publishing 96 papers and book chapters. And in 2017, I actually received a Senior Investigator Award from an American Society of Reproductive Immunology, which is the closest society with which I worked quite closely with them. And in 2018, I transitioned to this new role of the Scientific Director for the Institute of Infection and Immunity. So this is sort of my journey of that transformation that you undergo from I'm trying to be an independent investigator to being a successful investigator to that now what? That's where I really want to talk to you about today, where many of you who are listening in today are really at that juncture of, okay, I got my first grant, I have a research program, now what? And that's where a lot of the times people don't know what the next steps are, how to manage and negotiate, and how to move that career trajectory to success. So what I'd like to talk to you a little bit about is the challenges that are very specific to this transition into the mid-career part of your career trajectory. And the things that everybody goes through, and sometimes you realize it and sometimes you don't. Sometimes you realize it a little late, after you didn't get your grant funded or you didn't get your promotion at first try. The difference between being an early career investigators where everybody encourages you, is looking out for you, is providing you mentorship, to the mid-career investigator where, from 5 to 15 years, you're playing in the big leagues now while you're still trying to figure things out because there are still so many things that you're doing for the first time. There's an increased workload and higher expectations. That cocoon of no teaching, focus on your grants, build your research program is no longer there. The expectations of pushing out papers, how many publications you have per year, taking on more speaking roles. If you get a lot of speaking roles, keeping up with them. If you don't get speaking roles, then reaching out and networking to get those, because those are important additions to your CV. Applying for multiple awards, multiple grants. You look at your peers and you see that they're getting these awards. So there's a lot of pressure, self-imposed pressure and expectation. And then the expectation to continue to maintain a high level of performance while taking on new roles, sitting on more committees that your department chair might be asking you, taking on more teaching load because now you're one of the experienced people in the department and you're supposed to now coordinate large courses. And accompany that with the lack of meaningful mentorship. In your early career investigator period, you have many people advising you. As you get more senior, people seem to think that you're experienced and that you don't need any more guidance or mentorship. So what do you do at that point? And the difficulties in getting funded. I remember that one of the most terrifying moments of my career were when I had to renew my first grant. Biggest imposter syndrome. I didn't think I could do it. I didn't know what I was going to do. Of course, by that time, I had 3 students, a technician relying on me to, come through with the funding. And of course, everybody was telling me how much more difficult it is to renew a grant than to get one in the first place. And of course, there's fewer opportunities in terms of where you can apply. There are so many places where you can apply as an early career investigator, but as a mid-career researcher, you are in the big leagues now. And then the continuous pressure for higher bar for that promotion from associate to full professor, the clock ticking. You have 6 more years to go when you will be reviewed for being sort of a leader in your field. So all of these are significant challenges, not to mention, personal balancing. So as a woman and as a mother, I was raising 2 kids while all of these expectations and everything pile up on you. Actually, that should have been here in my next slide, that the specific challenges for women as mid-career investigators. So of course, we're all familiar, and by now we know a lot about the gender inequities that exist in the broader health research enterprise within academic institutions and hiring, promotion, nomination processes, within the funding landscape of unconscious bias in how applicants are judged, their grants are looked at, the success rates are different. The female researchers also tend to have increasing or higher demand for mentoring and committee work. So the gender expectations are very different between male and female PIs in general, not for everybody, but for most. Whereas female PIs are supposed to be kind, thought sensitive, as well as very successful and doing leadership roles and carrying, huge burden of other work that is given to them. There are definitely differences between how male and female PIs are treated within the community and even by trainees themselves. And then, of course, there's the balancing priorities at home, where there's increased burden on female researchers. One of the big things that I read about and I have personally experienced is the lack of leadership opportunities. Women are typically underestimated. And most of the time when I got asked to do things, it was typically to volunteer, and I was recognized for my organizational skills rather than leadership skills. And the lack of advocates, that is so huge. The lack of advocates to promote women and to advance their careers, to give them opportunities for leadership, which increases your feeling of isolation and feeling of the imposter syndrome and feeling of self-criticism, which are huge for women. And again, remember, doing all this in your mid-career while you're raising a family if you choose to have children. So these are all huge issues and challenges. No wonder Statistics Canada has shown that in 1987, about 20% of the STEM workforce was female. And by 2015, that number had barely nudged. So in 2015, that had barely risen to 22%. So clearly, there's a lot of challenges that are there as mid-career investigators, and compounding that if you're women, and compounding that if you belong to a racialized group. And then add to these challenges, to be contemporary in this year, the COVID-19 adding to these challenges. And there have been many studies that have been conducted now, and a majority of researchers talk about their inability to network, to participate in workshops, opportunities, which come through networking, traveling to collect data, do research, and then labs being shut down. So that's been a huge challenge. And unlike what a very minority of researchers experience, where being at home has actually provided more hours, Contrary to that, majority of the scientists and researchers being at home have experienced less time available to be able to actually do their work, especially providing childcare and taking care of family at home. So clearly, lots of challenges. And just to add to that, earlier this year in May, the Australian Academy of Sciences conducted a national survey to understand the effects of COVID in such a lockdown. What they found was that COVID has made many of the existing problems worse and likely to have long-lasting impact on the careers and well-being of investigators. So we all know, especially women who have children, that when you go on maternity leaves, that impacts your performance at work. And as researchers, even though research agencies like CIHR and tri-councils are providing lots of suggestions and guidance to reviewers to take that into account, it does convert into long-term effects on your careers and your productivity. And missing out on a few months really has impact, not as much on that year as it does 2 years from then, when your number of papers that you are producing is going down. And that, of course, plays into the next time you're up for promotion. So there's a clear understanding that these short-term disruptions have long-term impacts. And not everybody is impacted equally. In a number of cases, women are the primary caregivers, and this pandemic has had a really hard effect on women, in particular, in terms of their productivity. And that basically is shown that the cost of this to women is already being felt. And in very early work that has been done, it's showing that the preprint servers submissions rose more quickly for male authors than for female authors. And female authors accounted for only about a third of published COVID-19 papers since January. And women from diverse backgrounds face additional barriers to entry, retention, progress in STEM. And therefore, it's anticipated that the effect will be even harder in terms of the effects on the racialized communities and researchers from those communities. So clearly, this is going to have a long-term impact, and it is in that light that CIHR and a number of tri-council agencies within Canada are looking at to see how we can compensate and how we can provide some bridges to fill the gap that is going to occur over the next 2, 3, 5 years on researchers across the board, women researchers, minority researchers in particular. So I think I'm painting a dire picture, but what I'd like to do now is to take a few minutes to actually talk about some strategies and techniques to manage these transitions in your career, in terms of managing these changes and managing unexpected changes like COVID that nobody ever expected. Or if you're looking long-term to switch your career paths, how do you manage those transitions? So I put in here, the 4 pillars of hard work, motivation and passion, proactive and initiative, persistence and resilience, which are just basic requirements for anybody who's trying to carve a career in health sciences, in medical research. These are just given. But then in this wheel that you probably have seen in other seminars that you have attended of career development, it's about knowing yourself, exploring options, getting focused, and then taking action. For each of these, I've outlined a few different things that I found, helped me a lot in terms of the progress that I made through my career through these transitions, whether it was transitioning from a postdoc to being an early career investigator to mid-career investigator, or even as a senior investigator, the transition that I made from being an established researcher to applying for my current job and getting this job. At every stage, you have to ask yourself in terms of knowing yourself, what stage of life you are, what is your long-term vision and ambition, what are your supports in work and personal life, what are your strengths and how do you use those? And then where do you need help? Recognizing your weakness is just as important, if not more, than your strengths, and to pick people you can trust to work on those weaknesses. And then in terms of exploring options, developing networks and becoming visible, because options come open when people know who you are and you are reaching to other people. Stepping up when opportunities come up, not waiting to be invited. For me, that was a big transition. I kept thinking, if I'm good enough, people will ask me. That doesn't happen. You have to step out of your comfort zone and raise your hand when opportunities come. Explore different options. Take some professional development courses. I didn't do that till very late because the department actually offered me and said, would you like to take some leadership courses? And I went there to please my chair, but then I realized how much I could learn from these. I took some teaching courses, which changed the way that I taught and managed large courses. And then in terms of getting focused, set the visions and goal for yourself. I'll talk about this as a little bit more where, there's sort of your monthly goals, your yearly goals, your 5-year, 10-year plan, and then specific actions for those goals, sending reminders. I always do. I do it even to this day with my lab. We have twice a year meetings where I look at our lab and everything that's going on and remind ourselves of our goals and where we are in those goals. Coming up with an alternate plan and get a career coach. I realized that many of the colleagues who were very successful had actually used this tactic. To get a career coach, talk to somebody about this. And then finally, once you have a plan in terms of taking action, get the best advice about your options. Don't be afraid to pick up the phone or send people an email and say, I have this opportunity. Can I get your thoughts about this? Make a list of positives and negatives. Any new opportunity that comes your way. I do this now as I'm mentoring some of the younger faculty, and they come to me and say, I'm being asked to do this. Should I do this? And I'll say, but you need to make a list of positives and negatives to see, does this work for you in terms of furthering your career in the sum total? Have a close circle of peers, friends, people who understand your work, to talk to these things about. Check how these opportunities fit into your long-term vision. There are so many things that you'll get asked to do, but they all have to fill into some kind of vision. And then make adjustments to your life. One of the big things that I did when I took up my position as the scientific director was to recognize that my kids were older, they were teenagers, and I could spend more time and I could travel more. And I made adjustments to my personal life to make sure that my husband had more free time, because I was going to be working long hours and doing a lot of work. And I think that was probably one of the best things that we did, because going through the COVID, where I'm spending any given day for 9 months now, 12 to 15 hours working, it hasn't really made it too difficult for us to really have that adjustment come. I couldn't have done this 10 years ago when my kids were younger and I needed to be there for them. So this is a personal balance for every person. And that's something that you have to see where your comfort zone is to make those adjustments. So finally, last few slides, what advice would I give to my mid-career researcher self? Number one, strategic planning. I think I learned about this too late, but it's so important that you think not where you are today and what grants you're applying for today or this year, but actually to think 5 years ahead, 10 years ahead, and try to leverage what you're doing now to support that future vision. I've been asked when I do my visits to different centers where early career investigators will say, well, I have, $20,000 grants on 3 different things. What should I be doing? And I say that to them now, looking back at what I did, and say, where does that fit into your long vision? How are these smaller grants going to become part of your bigger program? And that should help you tailor make what programs you apply for, what grants you write. Probably one of the best things that I did, and it wasn't on purpose, but just because I was writing grant after grant after grant, I started taking 1 day a week to think, plan, write, and give myself time to reflect on what my plan was, what I was doing that year, how that was feeding into that 5-year. And I think that really gave me that space to give myself some thinking time. The other thing that I would advise is myself, looking back, would be to be very focused on where I'm sending my grants, because it's really important key to find panels and reviewers that are friendly to your research. If you're barking up the wrong tree, you're not going to get through. That was an advice that I got from one of my mentors, that maybe you're barking up the wrong tree. You need to take your research and go to other funders or other journals, which will be more friendly towards your research. Set personally meaningful professional goals. What I'm meaning by that is find something that means to you in your career. Going through my mid-career years, as many of my colleagues were becoming assistant deans and department chairs, I just didn't have the motivation to apply for those jobs or to get inspired to do that, because that wasn't that meaningful to me. But when I decided to apply for this particular job, I felt very passionate about it, because I knew I could make a difference for the entire infection and immunity community. And because that community had given so much to me, it meant a lot for me to be able to return that and do things for my community. So really finding meaningful professional goals, being persistent, and establishing a reputation for scientific excellence and reliability, because it's a small community. People look for the kind of grants that you're writing, for the kind of papers that you're writing, and you really have to establish a reputation and don't take no for an answer when you get, your papers rejected. Tolerance for failure is just a path to success. You just have to tolerate failure and try again. Opportunities for growth by networking, connecting with colleagues. This is a hard one for many people, because networking and connecting, especially for women who are racialized or coming from minority communities like myself, this is very hard to do. But you have to overcome your inhibitions. And I would set small goals for myself to say, I'm just going to do this, and that's good enough. And over time, that becomes more and more natural to be able to do that. And to establish a circle of friends and peers who are supportive, and establish that people who are positive energy, not negative energy, is so important. Last couple of slides, I'd just like to sum up by finally suggesting to you to reconceptualize success. As we go through these tough times, a single model of becoming a professor, having a successful research program, and then moving to be a department chair, an assistant dean, an associate dean, and whatever else is there, that's a very narrow definition of success. You really need to establish clarity during your mid-career years to what your senior investigator years will look like. What does that mean to you? And if that means to you that you just want to have an excellent research program and do excellent research and be a very well-funded, well-connected researchers, that's excellent. That's perfect. You have a clarity in your path, what you're laying out. But if your ambition and your success definition is some leadership roles or other things or connecting to community, you really need to establish that clarity, now in your mid-career years. And then look around you and look at people and see what appeals to you in terms of success and what the career path of those people was. And how can you set yourselves goals and timelines? Where would you like to be in next 5 years? And then incremental, steady effort, 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, 1 year at a time. I give lots of examples to my trainees, and I basically say, every talk that you give, every defense that you do, every paper that you write is like a brick. You're building that brick by brick, the whole dream house that you want to be in. And if whatever that means to you. And finally, I'd like to end with some coming right back to CIHR and the efforts to support mid-career opportunities. CIHR is very clear in our understanding that even as early career investigators need a lot of support, we really need to make sure that the mid-career researchers are also being supported and provided with opportunities. And for that reason, we are actually partnering with CAR and CFID and putting together mid-career workshops. This is one of those workshops where we are partnering this. This will be a regular feature. We recently sponsored some sex and gender science chairs in infection and immunity. We are looking to partner for more of these opportunities. The CIHR CEPI Leadership Award for Scientific Excellence in Vaccine Development, and this will be a very specific opportunity for mid-career investigators. And finally, if you want to keep in touch and see what else CIHR and III is putting out, these are the different ways to stay in touch with us. I have a Twitter account. We are not allowed to have institute Twitter accounts, so you can sign up for my Twitter account, the CIHR website, which we try to keep as fresh as we can. And then, of course, sign up for our e-bulletin because you will get that in your inbox every 2 weeks, all the newest updates that you need. And I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.